story of our city is written in the foundations. On the land of the Cherokee and the Muskogee Creek people, inscribed inside the railroad tracks, a city built by the enslaved, the indigenous, and the immigrant, the song of our city lives in the narrative of our neighborhoods, in blueprints and red lines, in trolley tracks and bus lines, in guitar riffs and bass lines. Can we tune in to the rhythm of our city? The heart of our city is found at the corner of struggle and success. How our city is the birthplace of movements for civil rights, for freedom, for inclusion, for all we've achieved, for all we have yet to accomplish. The soul of our city can be found in its buildings, lingering in the very bricks and mortar. How the walls of our historic places speak out to tell us their journey. Will we listen to the sound of our city? The legacy of our city lives in the leadership of our elders, lives in the place where what was then meets now and what can be. We want to honor our roots because our history is our future. Will you help us uphold Atlanta's future places?
Thank you, everyone, for attending our very first Preservation Week. And as I said before, we have some great speakers, or if I didn't say it before, I should have. My name is Susan E. Coleman, and I am an urban planner in the Department of City Planning, Design Studio, Historic Preservation Studio. It is with honor and pleasure to introduce our first presenter for today, and actually for the whole week, Ms. M. Tamanika Youngblood. M. Tamanika is a nationally recognized community development practitioner and a strong proponent of equitable development and sustainability as the model for addressing both the human and physical development needs of revitalizing communities. She earned a BA from New York University and an MBA from Atlanta University. She is a board chair of Sweet Auburn Works, a past board chair and president of the Historic District Development Corporation, HDDC, Atlanta's leading nonprofit community-based developer of historic homes in the Central City, and a trustee emeritus of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and a member of the National Advisory Council for the African American Heritage Action Fund. These are only a few of her accomplishments. And if I tried to list them all, we'll be here for the next 2 hours. But I would be, because M. Tamanika has been that impactful on historic preservation. But I would be remiss, because I really wanted to say this, if I didn't mention that she has been a mentor and a role model to all of us who have decided that this field of preservation would be our career choice. I know I personally see her as a mentor and, most important, as a friend. Not to delay any further, I would like to introduce to all of you Ms. M. Tamanika Youngblood. M. Tamanika, are you there?
Thank you, Susan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. My mic was off.
Okay.
Thank you and good morning. And those are very kind words. I appreciate them. It's interesting, before I begin my prepared remarks, how much of what I was going to say and am planning to say was reflected in the video. So needless to say, I'm really pleased. I hadn't seen the video. And it captures a good deal of my perspective with respect to the evolution of the field of historic preservation, specifically outside of the white community. So we've come a long way since I entered this field, at first tepidly after buying our 95-year-old house in the Martin Luther King Historic District, and then voraciously as I led the Diversity Council at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The council was an effort at the time to better reflect the diversity of America in the Trust's governance, staff, programs, sites, and affiliates. The thought was that given its national platform, the Trust's efforts would be, by extension, influential in terms of the preservation ethic and the preservation movement in general. The result of that effort is reflected in many ways, including the consistent diversity of the Trust's 11 most endangered, as well as its African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, which is working to raise $25 million and has just published Preserving African American Places, Growing Preservation's Potential as a Path for Equity. There is more work to be done. We are now doing a better job of recognizing the homes, neighborhoods, and sacred places of the true diverse America. However, preservationists have generally honored the owners and architects of many of the country's most gloried and storied structures. I maintain that none of those places would exist without the actual builders, many of whom have been at some time in the past immigrant and marginalized communities or people of color, not to mention people who were the original Americans or enslaved people. We need to recognize those whose blood and sweat have made these structures possible, as well as those who owned and lived there, because it's a way to broaden the preservation movement and engage and connect all the diverse backgrounds, cultures, and ethnicities that made these places possible in a way that we have not done. So for us, the point of inclusion and diversity should really be an attempt to get to equity in preservation. I think this time of racial reckoning provides a path, should we be open to it or willing to take it, a gateway ultimately to the broader tenets of social justice. This moment provides another opportunity for us to reevaluate what we have in the past revered and preserved with new eyes and with unrelenting candor about the impact of that reverence and preservation on African Americans specifically and people of color in general. I remain hopeful, even in Atlanta, where development rules and preservation is often seen as an impediment and not an opportunity. There are examples of hopeful signs. Leadership from Commissioner Keene at City Hall, Sheffield Hale at the Atlanta History Center, the Main Street cohort, this conference, its topic, and its participants are indications that we're headed in a more thoughtful, equitable direction. What I would like to leave you with today, though, is what I believe to be the value of viewing historic preservation not in isolation or as simply a tool. Historic preservation is the tangible manifestation of our history, the actual things and places that are the embodiment of our history. Who gets to tell our history also gets to tell our story, which in many ways seeks to define who we were, who we are, and most importantly, who we can be. It is therefore critical that diversity, equity, and yes, social justice be reflected in that story, that history, and its manifestations, which we characterize as historic preservation. For this opportunity.
I too was muted. Sorry. Thank you, M. Thank you, M. Tamanika, for those wonderful words. As I had said prior, I've always seen you as a mentor and a person that I can always go to for wisdom. So we really, really do appreciate you logging in very early to be a part of our very first preservation week. So thank you very much. And now we're slated to hear from Commissioner Kane. Commissioner Kane, are you on the call yet?
1 second, his audio is loading.
Okay.
Commissioner, I think we're ready for your portion of the meeting. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
I apologize for being late. I was having technical difficulties. I'm not helpful when it comes to technical difficulties, so I apologize for being late. And thank you all for being here. And I'm happy to see Mtomanika Youngblood on my screen here.
Yeah.
And thankful that she's agreed to talk with everybody because of what she means to Atlanta, but also because of the national perspective she brings to our city and to the challenges around historic preservation and cities and community development and development in general. What it's like to care about a community when you're building in it and when you're trying to save our history. There's nobody better in this country to talk about this than Mtomanika Youngblood. So, and this is an important issue. For me, Atlanta's at an interesting time because if you take a longer look at Atlanta, the city has not really been growing in its history. The region has been growing tremendously. The city, not so much, but that's changed. And people will, and growth and development can be good, but not if it's, if it is done to the detriment of the people that live here and to the place that has been created. And for me, the issues that Atlantans most care about, whether it's affordability and the ability of a great diversity of people to live here, or the public realm of the city, all require that we protect our history. And so I think historic preservation and how we build the city is not a frivolous matter. It's kind of central to what makes this place what it is. And so, Doug, thank you and your team for putting together what is really an amazing program this week. And starts with the thoughts from Mtomanika Youngblood about our city and cities in general. So thank you for having me and letting me say a few words as we get started this morning on this amazing week of activity.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate you participating as well. We're very excited about the rest of the week, and I think it's time to move on to our next speaker, Susan.
Yes, our next speaker is Kevin Bacon. He is our director over in the design studio and over us in historic preservation. Kevin, are you on the call?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. You can begin if you like.
Okay. Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Always dangerous to start naming names when thanking people, but I did want to note a big thank you to not just our historic preservation team of the Office of Design for assembling the program this week, but particularly to Susan Coleman and Leslie Battle Williams and support from Sonia Sequeira and organizing the program and getting us ready. There are certainly so many things going on right now in the world and in everybody's lives, and to be able to make time for something as important as this, to remember that this exists and is important at this time. I'm glad we're able to do this as a part of our office. Thank you, Tim, for your remarks, and M. Tamanika, it's good to see you this morning. I've known M. Tamanika now for a number of years, not because of our work together in Atlanta, but from a project in Southwest Georgia that was very much rooted in its history and a very challenging series of conversations around that. So I completely agree with all of the remarks that there's no better person that I know of that could have started us off this week. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'll be brief this morning, but did want to expand a little bit more on historic preservation and its importance, particularly within our office. I think in some ways it's unique that historic preservation fits in with an office of design, but it actually makes a lot of sense if you think about, starting from Atlanta City Design and the Future Places project, and how that project alone really expands on the importance and the work that we need to do on preserving history and telling stories within Atlanta. That it's not just something that we do on a project by project basis, but is a very unique way for thinking about how we go about this within the city. And that's a design issue as we're concerned about the design of public spaces and leading on those efforts, and the design of buildings, that historic preservation isn't just about protecting a place or a building. It's like has been stated here before, it's about the stories that we're wanting to tell, not just the polished versions that we've heard in Atlanta and time and again, but the honest ones that we are wanting to bring to light, the ones that we don't know about yet that we want to share, and not just uncovering those stories, but making sure they're a part of the way that we're thinking about the design of the city and its public spaces and its architecture. And so no better reason for that to be part of our Office of Design, where we're always thinking about these things, very much about the city, and wanting to invite people into those conversations. And we see this as just this week, Preservation Week, and the program we have here today, just the beginning of that. Certainly with our Office of Design, we have the Urban Design Awards that we unfortunately had to cancel for this year. We hope to bring them back again in the 2021, but that this will be the fall counterpoint to that event, that we will be looking at continuing Preservation Week going forward, and continuing to make the discussion about our historic preservation efforts and our identification of future places, and how we integrate those with the design of the city and the stories we're telling is very much a part of our work going forward, and are looking forward to having everybody here with us today and not with us today to join us in a part of that effort going forward. So thank you all very much for attending today. Susan, I think you might.
I am on mute
There
again.
you
I'm
go.
sorry, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin, for those remarks. We really do appreciate them, and we're going to move forward. Doug Young, our director, my boss over in historic preservation, who's going to talk about the summary of the Future Places project. Doug, are you ready?
I am indeed. Thank you, Susan. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen and get into the presentation. I'm very excited to share this information with everybody. All right, can everybody see that first slide there? Great. I wanted to spend a few minutes today to talk about the Future Places project. This was the first really in-depth thought exercise about historic preservation in the city of Atlanta in a long time, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But we really wanted to try to showcase that on our session today, and a little bit later on Thursday, we'll be talking more about how to move forward with the Future Places project. But for right now, I wanted to provide an overview of what it was, what we accomplished during that, and what really is left to be done. To really start at the beginning, at least as far as we're concerned in the Department of City Planning, is we have to go back to Atlanta City Design, our vision document for the city of Atlanta. And to do that, I want to go to one of the quotes in the document, which is, as we begin to design our future, the intrinsic value of progress will only be realized when we stand up for the people and places that have meaning. And I think it's important to understand that a couple words here. One is the word meaning and the word intrinsic. These are really core values of Atlanta City Design and core principles of Atlanta City Design. And as Commissioner Keene said, we really can't say that we move forward as a city unless we have protected our historic properties and our historic places and the people and stories that go with them. So that's really the starting point for the Future Places project. So in short, the Future Places project was an initiative to ensure that the city retains its historic identity as it moves forward. This is not really so much about looking at the past, but really looking forward so that we can understand how our history is the basis for our future and how it's one of the most critical portions of how to make that the best it can be. More particularly, the Future Places project was an effort to engage some of the usual folks who talk about preservation and history and historic places in the city of Atlanta, but also to talk to and include new people in that conversation, folks who have not been asked questions before about the city's history or historic preservation. We also wanted to compare ourselves to other cities and places around the country, see how we stack up to those peer cities. We compiled some maps and data about what we know and what we've learned along the way. We did a little bit of field work around the city of Atlanta. We'll talk about that in just a minute. We also did a very in-depth study of the city's parks system, which was really revealing and really quite fascinating. We created what we call the Story of Atlanta, which was a set of 4 or 5 themes of the city's history that is really provides sort of the building block of where we think we've come from in the city's past. And of course, we're creating a roadmap for what lies ahead for the city of Atlanta for historic preservation. But most importantly, I think it's important to remember that the Future Places project is an ongoing effort. While the formal process might have finished this year, there's a lot more work to be done, and a lot more conversations to be had. One of the questions that arises when we had these conversations this past year or so was, so why would we do the Future Places project? What's the value of that? And I think if you look in the past, referring back to M. Tomanika's comments, is you need to figure out what we've been talking about before about historic preservation in the city of Atlanta. There's a lot of different viewpoints about historic preservation. We have the city's brand that we have to deal with, which is how we think we should be doing things in the city of Atlanta. Commissioner Keene is fond of talking about how we need to make sure we learn from our past. We don't have to repeat it necessarily. So it's important that we know that our brand, our perceived brand, is that we are always looking forward, it's always new, it's always shiny, it's always progressive. But what does that really mean for our history and our historic preservation principles and properties and places? We need to make sure that our brand really isn't just about new, but about keeping what we have and using that to tell our story better. As I noted earlier, the last time we did this kind of in-depth analysis was in the 1980s. So it's been 30, 40 years since we've had this kind of conversation. And of course, we all know that a lot has changed in the last 30 years in the city of Atlanta. And more particularly in the last maybe 10 or so years, it's been very rapid physical change here as well. Neighborhoods, in some cases, changing before our eyes, or parts of downtown changing before our eyes. We already talked about Atlanta City Design and how this is one of the 4 or 5 key next steps in that process. And then the other thing that we realized along the way was that the city of Atlanta's own planning and design decisions were affecting historic places and buildings and spaces as much as private decisions were. So we need to understand how the city's actions were affecting what was going on with the city's historic places. But more importantly, looking to the future, we wanted the Future Places project to confirm that the city of Atlanta's historic buildings and places are our authentic identity. It what makes Atlanta, Atlanta, and give us a sense of place and grounding for what is the city of Atlanta. Without history and historic spaces and places and the people and stories that go with them, Atlanta could be really anywhere in the United States. It's that grounding, that sense of place that gives it a unique Atlanta flavor. We also want to confirm that historic places and buildings have cultural and community meaning, and then they also generate economic value. They are, in fact, often the starting point for neighborhood revitalization or the revitalization of a commercial corridor. We also knew there were lots of myths and facts about historic preservation in the city of Atlanta. We knew that there was generally not so much dialogue in the civic body about historic preservation, but we knew it was increasing, and there was increasing expectations by the public. So we needed to respond to those along the way. As I mentioned earlier, we wanted to add to and change the conversation and approach to historic preservation. And of course, determine the role of historic buildings and places and spaces in the city's future. And as I mentioned before, create that roadmap for the next 30 years of how we should deal with historic preservation. Just real quick, a timeline of the formal process. We started last April with background research and the project launch. That continued through September of this past year. And then in 2019, October, we started our first round of public meetings. We'll talk about those in just a minute. And then during the winter months, November to February, we did a couple pop-up shops, and we did more project analysis and research when we couldn't get out so much in the field for any of the survey work. In March of this year, we had our second round of public meetings, really debuting the initial results from the analysis and research. Then for April to July, there was a completion of the final project deliverables, and then from June to now, we've been distributing those deliverables and talking about our next steps in the process. But as I mentioned earlier, the Future Places project really is an ongoing conversation. At the end of this presentation, we'll talk about how we're moving forward with some of those ideas. So what do we have now that we're done with this project? Done being in quotes there. Of course, we'll have some very important reports and documents to share with folks. And in fact, at the end of this presentation, we'll go to our new Now Live website. We can see this very important information. We have the summary report, which is the sort of the short read of the project. We have 4 in-depth technical reports. One that summarizes our public participation, and most importantly, the 2 surveys that we did. We have an in-depth Parks and Recreation Department report, where we surveyed over 300 park properties in the city of Atlanta for what's historic about them and what are their historic stories. As I mentioned earlier, we had our peer city analysis. We compared ourselves in depth to 6 cities. And then we did some windshield survey work, focusing on neighborhoods that were not otherwise well known or well documented before. We also generated a map and data mapping catalog with about 10 or 12 different kind of map analyses of the city of Atlanta. But most importantly, we've generated a call to action, which is the project recommendations for what we should do forward with historic preservation. The project website, a project video, which we just saw, then also new branding and new messaging, which shows up in this presentation, as well as all of our documents and collateral we generated for the project. Now I want to quickly go into some of these a little more in depth. We had 2 rounds of public meetings, one in the fall of 2019 and one in the spring of 2020. Those were all around the city of Atlanta, as well as a couple downtown. We had some pop-up presentations or road shows around the city of Atlanta. And at the meetings themselves, you could do exercises, hands-on exercises, to respond to the myths and facts, see what other cities were doing, do a little streetscape interactive work. You can see a little screenshot there of Adams Alley about how infill might or might not fit in with your neighborhood. You can reflect on the survey priorities and also ask us what we were missing in our work, what were we not taking care of in this Future Places project. You could also contribute to the story of Atlanta, and then also in the second round of meetings, prioritize those project recommendations, which we'll talk about next. Here's just a quick sample of some of the work in the fall of 2019 for public engagement. You can see there's about a dozen or so meetings there, both larger sort of traditional public meetings, as well as a couple stops at a coffee shop and a couple MP meetings around the city of Atlanta. One of the most interesting things about our public engagement work was, for the first time, as far as we know, there is a general baseline survey done about people's attitudes and interest and information level about historic preservation. This you might call a third-party scientific survey. It was randomly selected folks. We had 519 respondents, and these were reflective of the city's demographics. And what this does is allows us to provide a baseline set of information about what people know about historic preservation, about historic properties, even about the city's history. And we were able to compare that to what we call the informed citizen survey. Because one of the things we were really conscious of during this process was who was actually going to come to a meeting or go online to a website or take a survey online, because those are self-selecting participants. Those are folks who are already inclined to be concerned about the topic. and already inclined to be concerned about the future of what should happen with historic preservation in the city of Atlanta. Well, we had 255 people, informed citizens, take that survey. And what we learned, because we collected basic demographic information, is that folks were already inclined to be concerned about historic preservation, were more white and more affluent than the city's demographic in general. And in some ways, that wasn't too surprising. If you think about historic preservation in the city of Atlanta, generally speaking, for many years, that's in fact the folks who are concerned about it. So while we hope to have a public engagement process that would have changed that along the way, we have to acknowledge the fact that while we did make some strides in that effort, there's still more work to be done. Historic preservation conversations are not reflective of the city's demographics. And our work sort of confirmed our potential bias we knew from the beginning. We're hoping to correct, but as I said, more work needs to be done in that regard. Speaking about the park survey work, we surveyed 372 of the city-owned parks properties. That was a grant from the State Preservation Office that helped us do that. We looked at buildings and structures and objects and landscapes and all that stuff that shows up in a city park. Of that work, we actually created 236 entries in the statewide GIS system for the city's parks system. That'll be the first time that many of these parks are recognized in that statewide system as being potentially historic places or spaces. 4 of our parks were listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and 108 were within National Register listed neighborhoods or parts of the city of Atlanta. And 12 of those parks contain specific historic sites or houses, standing alone from those parks as well. And many of them had historic markers or memorials. But one of the most interesting things that we did is we created 122 park profiles, park cut sheets, if you will, or tear sheets, that in 2 or 3 pages try to capture the history of the park as well as provide some basic context photographs and maybe even a few historic photographs. Each of those parks profiles will allow us, the Parks Department, the neighborhoods that are concerned about them, or even individuals to learn more about those individual park locations in a really quick, easy to read format. Those park profiles, as well as all the other work that we'll talk about, is available on the project website, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. In doing the research for the parks, though, we came up with 6 themes that sort of embodied the park system's history. But one of the most important things we realized along the way is that the city's park system is, in fact, the history of the city. The parks themselves, their design, their arrangement, when they were created, they reflect the city's history in a sort of more microcosm. But there were 6 themes that we identified. One of them was how Atlantans played in the 20th century, how civil rights related to Atlanta's parks and vice versa, the importance of Frederick Law Olmsted's landscapes on the city of Atlanta, how parks and the development of city neighborhoods were integral and related to each other. In many cases, they were the important part of the neighborhood's design and its promotion as a place to live and to be. The parks themselves serve as a timeline with sites and memorials in them that capture snippets of the city's history, little moments in the city's history. Then the other thing we identified was that the City of Atlanta Parks Department and the city's parks were making unusable space into parks themselves. In many cases, there are several parks in the city of Atlanta that were leftover space. They were not planned to be parks from the beginning, but were made into parks as an afterthought. And that affects their relationship to their neighborhoods, their locations, as well as their usability and practicality for the present day. The privacy analysis was also quite interesting. These are a couple of the cities that we profiled in trying to compare ourselves to how we're doing with our programs, our economic incentives, our staff structure, our budgets, our capacity. All of those items were looked at. And what's interesting about this analysis, it showed that while the city of Atlanta certainly has work to do in its historic preservation program, we actually are in the leading group as far as the peer cities for what we do about historic preservation. The city of Atlanta started out actually in the 1970s with some very forward-looking preservation activities, and while some of those need to be updated, we're still moving creatively forward with historic preservation in the city of Atlanta. But we did learn a fair amount from our peer cities and other places in the United States that became part of our recommendations for folks to reflect on as we try to prioritize what we do next. We also did some windshield survey work. This is not an in-depth survey. We never intended to survey the city of Atlanta because, in fact, we already know quite a bit about different parts of the city of Atlanta. What you see here on this slide is the map on the right with the purple neighborhoods highlighted. Those were the 33 neighborhoods that were actually surveyed as part of this effort to try to bring those neighborhoods up to some similar level of information as we might have about others. Those 33 neighborhoods surveyed had a small reconnaissance map, which you can see there in the middle, as well as photographs taken and a brief history prepared that could be used as a stepping stone for future preservation, planning, and survey work. I also mentioned earlier that we tried to capture the story of Atlanta. In this case, we developed 5 themes of that story: struggle and imperfection, hustle and hard work, a legacy of inclusion and creating opportunity, upward movement, and advancing mobility. On the project website, you can find out more information about these themes and why we felt they captured the city's story, not so much its history, because we think the history in some cases has been well documented, but what is the story, what is the essence, what is the DNA of Atlanta's past, and how does that inform our future? So this takes us to the project recommendations, which we'll talk about in just a minute more in depth. But in summary, these are about how to help people know about historic places and spaces, how do help people understand about historic preservation, how to share that information amongst ourselves and amongst folks who are not part of the conversation in the past. How do we learn more about ourselves and our city? We know a fair amount already, but there's lots of untold stories in untold places and unknown places for many folks that we need to learn more about. One of the things that's critical to remember about the Future Places Project going forward is that there's a lot of things in places and spaces in the city of Atlanta, of which they might be unknown to some folks, but they've been well known to others for quite a long time. The question is, what do we do about those stories that we are just maybe learning about as city staff, but have been well known to folks already? How do we make those stories ours and make them shared with everybody else? We have to recognize what we value, keep what we value, and ultimately protect what we value. Going back to what we have when we're done, though, I think this is the most important question for us to think about. We actually have more answers than before, but we actually have more questions. And that was okay. We knew that going forward, that might be the case. This was not necessarily a fact-finding mission by the city of Atlanta. This was a question about partnerships, about getting ideas from new tools and techniques, as well as new conversations and new priorities. In our view, the information wasn't the key as much as who was talking about that information and who knew about that information. That's why we think the Future Places Project is really a process, not a set thing that gets finished in 2020, because we have conversations we have new tools and techniques to explore, and we have new partnerships to develop and nurture. And that's what was the most important thing about the Future Places Project, was how do we change the conversation? How do we involve more people in that conversation? And how do we continually ask questions and hopefully find answers along the way? So again, let's remember, as we move forward, as we progress in the city of Atlanta, we need to stand up for people and places that have meaning. We need to stand up for people and places that have meaning. Thank you for listening to that summary of the Future Places Project.
Thank you, Doug. Now to move on to the next segment of our agenda, it will be Doug and I both are going to speak about the call to action recommendations. So Doug will start it off and then I will chime in on that. You ready, Doug?
I am, but before we move forward, since I thought if there was any particular questions about the summary of the project that I could respond to, or anybody on the team who was a part of that could respond to, we could take those now and then move on to the call to action.
Okay,
Is there any particular questions folks had? I believe Ms. Silverman might have a question.
Okay.
Oh,
if you want to, there you go.
So I probably have a lot of questions, but I can't let this go by without saying that I appreciate what a substantive overview you have given, and it just makes the website very, very valuable because, you know, I just see a lot of promise here for what we can do more immediately, but also long range. So thank you.
No, our pleasure. The website is great. We'll be looking at that real quickly before we end today, because the large amount of information and content that folks can really at their own level dive into. There's an opportunity to look at the summary report, which is sort of a mid-level engagement, or you can get really in depth on the parks work, the windshield survey, and that'll all be available on the website. So thank you. Yeah, we're looking forward to sharing that as well. Great, let's go to the project recommendations. I will share my screen again. Can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So as mentioned before, the Future Places project came up with project recommendations. These were pulled together in the call to action, which actually is a physical booklet that we have as well, but is also live, of course, on the project website. And you'll be able to look at these more in depth and read about them more as you have time. You know, the project recommendations were drawn from really four principal sources. One was the public meetings and input we got through those meetings. What were folks' interests? What were their folks' concerns? What were their priorities? Then in addition, we had the City of Atlanta's Historic Preservation staff, their experiences, the peer city analysis, and the park survey and analysis. One of the things that was important about the Future Places project was we wanted to ask folks what their priorities might be. Let me go back real quick. So we asked them not to rank them 1 through 5 or 1 through 10, but also to rank them as being important and urgent, maybe being important but not urgent, or not being important or urgent at all. What you'll see here when we talk about the priorities was how that was reflected in those rankings. I will say that the sample size of folks who took this survey was quite small, 75 people. But it does give us an initial good snapshot of what folks thought about these recommendations. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, they're grouped by about 7 or 8 categories. The first one is help people know. And these are not in any particular order. We'll talk about their priorities in just a minute. We talked about creating pop-up history kiosks around the City of Atlanta. These could actually be coupled with our placemaking exercises and activities in the Department of City Planning. Social media engagement on applications and projects, getting more information out digitally to folks about the applications that come up every 2 weeks or so with the Urban Design Commission, among other things. Having a park social media campaign about how to tag photos of your favorite park to raise awareness of those great spaces here in the City of Atlanta. Creating story maps, which are online digital maps of pop-up photos and stories and even videos that can help you tour the city and tour its park systems. As well as creating success stories in a preservation blog coming from the City of Atlanta, how to really talk about preservation as being an all-encompassing exercise. One of the things that we often heard from folks in our conversations was they weren't sure that there were successes in historic preservation. They felt often that they were the only ones talking about the topic. So by sharing stories in the blog, we can help spread the good news about historic preservation. There's a great interest in having staff presence at more city activities and more communities, and creating a community liaison program to have a way for any neighborhood, whether they have a historic district or not, have a point of communication with our office. So in this group, Susan, you want to talk about the priorities there?
Yes, for this group of help people to know, these are the top priorities that came out of that particular survey. The first high ranking one was 64%, which was community liaison program, as Doug had mentioned, just to allow people, whether they were historic districts or not, to have some kind of communication from us. And a lot of times when that happens, we also find out a lot of things that might be happening in particular communities that we may have not even known about, or possibly could be historic in their own right. So that's important. The other high topping ranking one was number 2, which was 63%, which is social media public engagement on applications and projects. So this is to post images and information on social media about applications for work, proposed demolitions on historic properties and buildings, which is very important. And then the last one was 55%, which was number 6, which is city preservation staff presence. So this would allow us to be, I guess, more actively involved. Right now, we're pretty busy, and so this having more staff so that we can get out there more is very important. Very important to help people know.
The next group we had of our recommendations was helping people share. And this is both amongst the city staff in the public, but the public amongst themselves. One of the recommendation was a student design essay or photography contest. That could be both at the high school or college level. A historic preservation lecture series. We found that bringing new voices to historic preservation is a real way to expand the conversation, and also to get a little bit out of the routine of what we normally talk about in historic preservation is inject some of those fresh ideas. Having Historic Preservation Day at Atlanta City Hall. This is the virtual version of that, but we have some great ideas to move into a more physical event when we're able to do that in a safe manner. They'll both highlight what the city is doing as well as highlight what our great neighborhood groups and nonprofits are doing around the city of Atlanta. A Save Our Story social media campaign where you could actually highlight a place in the city of Atlanta, tag that, if you will, on your social media account to, again, alert folks to maybe unknown stories or places that maybe not be as popular as might be other places in the city of Atlanta. Convene a historic preservation roundtable group, a way to facilitate among a lot of folks. One of the things we learned about this process was there's a lot of folks who are doing something about historic preservation, even if they don't call themselves historic preservation group or use that in their name. It's still connected to the idea of saving the city's historic places and spaces. And the important thing that we thought was to bring those folks together on some periodic basis to talk about what's going on, to avoid reinventing the wheel, but also to look for those synergy benefits of learning from what other folks are doing. Having some type of summer outreach program related to the city's park system that would highlight the great places to see and do, and maybe have some incentives or rewards to visiting a certain number of parks or a certain number of historic places. Expanding on the current Atlanta City Design's APS school curriculum to include a history-focused segment to, again, start a new generation of folks who are concerned about historic places and spaces. And then continue our oral history work. We started this in the Southwest Atlanta part of Atlanta with the Cascade Road corridor. That was something that actually Susan headed up. We want to expand that to other places here in the city.
And for this, the top 3 for this particular group, helping people share, was number 4. And I'm going to have to take my glasses off to read this. Save Our Story social media crowdsourcing campaign was actually 45. I'm sorry. The top one was 52 at number 7, which is history-focused APS school curriculum, and then 45 for Save Our Story social media crowdsourcing campaign. And then the last one was the history project that was very important. And as Doug said, we're trying to expand that to other sections of the city. In doing that work, a lot of people from other areas asked about how they could be involved in such a project. Okay, Doug.
Next grouping was helping people understand about the city of Atlanta's history. And this was a pretty wide-ranging set of ideas, both some very micro and very on the ground, and some very broad and programmatic. One of them was the hiring of an African American Heritage Preservation Coordinator, which would both be a working position in the sense that they would be doing on the ground City of Atlanta work, but also pursuing grants, performing outreach, and being a point of connection between nonprofit advocate organizations are concerned about African American heritage. Creating a historic preservation or design fellowship, which would be the idea to generate new ideas and new thinking about a historic preservation or design challenge. That could be tied in with the annual design award, so that each year you'd have a new problem posed that could be worked on by a fellow through the following year, and then the answer to that question or the response to that challenge would come up in next year's design awards. Creating a historic preservation design assistance team. One of the things we find is that when we are processing applications for historic preservation related projects, that some folks really just need a helping hand to get through that process, or more importantly, to understand what their options might be. By having this design assistance team, those folks would get additional help to make sure they get the best project for themselves and for the neighborhoods that they're in. Creating graphic manuals, handbooks, design guidelines, toolkits, roadshow kits, all these things that help share the message about historic preservation to a lot of folks around the city of Atlanta. Creating business development packages to talk about the economic value and economic benefits of historic preservation and historic places and spaces. Creating a digital Atlanta website to highlight the city of Atlanta's history. Creating a historic homeowner exhibition fair and training sessions. We have a lot of folks who are very interested in doing right by their historic homes and buildings, but they just need a little extra information to know how to do that. Creating a historic preservation academy that would be based on the NPU University model, or a citizens academy that the public safety departments run, which should be an ongoing set of online or in-person courses that folks could do that would help them learn about the city's historic preservation work, as well as historic preservation principles and techniques. Creating new preservation partnerships or strengthening the ones we already have. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of folks doing work around the city's history, historic properties, and public outreach and tours and advocacy. We need the city of Atlanta to strengthen our partnerships with those groups that are already doing a lot of great work. Emphasizing heritage tourism as a city that loves and embraces historic places and stories and people, and making the city of Atlanta a pro-history, a pro-history city, which is how do we make folks understand that there is a wealth of information and history to be learned in the city of Atlanta, experienced by yourself as a business traveler, maybe your family coming here to visit. The lastly in this grouping is support the city of Atlanta's new Atlanta Main Street program. It's just getting started with the cohort that was referenced by Tamanika. And so we want to make sure, as we already have been, be part of that conversation and help that program grow and flourish for the city's myriad of downtowns, if you will, that are scattered throughout the city.
And the top three recommendations that help people understand was number 3, for historic preservation design assistance team. The second one was 54% with heritage tourism, and then 9 preservation partnership at 52%. Pretty high actually for all of those. So the next group.
Sure, let me give a minute for my.
Okay, technology.
There we go.
Okay.
Great. So the next grouping was learn more about ourselves and our city. And there's a couple things that we included in this category. One was a Champions for History program, where a group or organization or an individual would take on the task of researching a topic or theme in the city's history, then report back to the city's preservation planning staff or some sort of larger group. And the city would pledge to support them in that research. So there would be an active partnership in fleshing out these unknown stories and in these unknown themes in the city's history. Another recommendation here was to create a cemetery inventory and catalog, be they abandoned or small cemeteries, or even our large cemeteries for that matter. In fact, our program tomorrow is going to be talking about one of our most important historic cemeteries in the city of Atlanta. But there's many, many more places in the city of Atlanta that we need to make sure we understand and know about, then ultimately can do what we need to protect them or take care of them. Create a regular, ongoing traditional field survey program, such as every summer or maybe one part of the school year. There's a established way for folks to be hired to do survey work in the city of Atlanta, maybe by theme or by region in the city. So we really continue to add to the information we already know about what's going on in the city of Atlanta, historic preservation-wise. But at the same time, create an alternative survey program that'd be very low cost, coarse grained surveys that can be done by lay persons in their neighborhoods that can be done sort of on a social media platform to allow for quick information to be gathered about places and then compiled in a very public and digital way so that can be shared. Then similarly working on cultural mapping work, which is for the public and the regular folks in the city of Atlanta to tell us what they think is important and have that in a shareable geographic GIS kind of system.
Okay. For the top, actually the top two, and to learn more about ourselves and our city would be 48% for number 5, which is the cultural mapping, and then 45% for the cemetery inventory category. And as Doug says, tomorrow we'll be highlighting Southview, which oftentimes many people do not think about, but is extremely important cemetery here in the city of Atlanta. Okay, Todd.
I apologize for the red lines on my screen. I'm not sure what that's about, but we will keep moving forward. We also recognize what we value, including a legacy building or home or business program to recognize places in the city of Atlanta, maybe not that don't need designation or protection, but they're worthy of our interest in our recognition. Do more proactive designations and protections around the city of Atlanta. Change our nomination options for who can nominate a property in the city of Atlanta. Create new nomination and designation tools. That's right now you only have really just one way to protect a historic building or place or neighborhood. Revise the historic preservation ordinance. Create standard interim controls during our designation process so that folks can focus their work on the actual designation itself. Have a major change would be to review demolition and alteration reviews for all properties 40 years old or older, whether designated or not. Create a structures of merit program, maybe similar to the legacy building or home business recognition program. Then also create an archaeological preservation ordinance. We do not have one right now in the city of Atlanta, so there's no protections for archaeological resources, at least on the city side, through an ordinance or other kind of city law.
Okay. The top 3 in this particular category of recognize what we value, which is a pretty high percentage of 72% for number 5, which is revise the existing city historic preservation ordinance. And then also for 66 is the nomination and designation tools. And that 65 is number 8, structure of merit program. And also, something here. When you see a star, that means it's one of the top of all the categories. So 72%, the revitalization or the existing city historic preservation ordinance is one of the top recommendations that we received for all of the categories. And I know we're doing some of that work in some of our historic districts right now. Okay, Doug.
The last one we have is protect what we value. And this is, again, a wide-ranging set of activities. This can involve focusing park acquisition on parks that are potential parks that have historic resources or historic places or spaces in them. Creating more city land economic-based incentives. Right now we have one property tax incentive program that applies to certain properties, historic properties in the city of Atlanta, but we could certainly have more. Create a historic preservation bond fund or revolving loan fund. And then also using some of the hotel motel tax for historic preservation purposes. Again, going back to that heritage preservation interest that we mentioned in our earlier grouping of recommendations.
In the top 2 in this category, protect what we value, is number 2 at 70% is the city-based economic incentives. And then last, number 4, hotel tax at 66% for historic preservation. And that is it. Oh, and number 2, the city's based economic incentive is one of our top recommendations for all the categories at 70%.
Our next grouping is keeping what we value. One of the recommendations is having a dedicated building inspector for historic preservation, increasing the fines associated with violations of the preservation ordinance, balancing the staff review versus commission review work here at the City of Atlanta. The staff reviews follow the same requirements and same priorities of a commission review. They've reduced the time and paperwork for both the staff and the applicant, making it a quicker, more efficient process. Improving our demolition by neglect enforcement and provisions, requiring City of Atlanta projects that would otherwise go through review and comment, have them actually be approved by the Urban Design Commission, particularly those that are related to historic properties. Have a deconstruction and salvage program so that folks are, if and when a building does need to be demolished after going through a thorough vetting, we're not just throwing those historic features in a landfill. And also creating a new park classification called Historic Resource Park, again, to highlight the importance of our historic park spaces to the City of Atlanta's culture and people.
Top 3 for keeping what we value is the top one is 73% for the demolition for neglected provision by neglect provisions. 69% is number 2, fines, and 68% is a dedicated building inspector for historic preservation. Now, okay, for the top out of all the categories, all 3 of these came in, all 3 of them, 73% for the demolition by neglect provision, 69% for fines, and most importantly, 88% for the dedicated building inspector for historic preservation.
That concludes our review of the project recommendations called for in the call to action. So I wanted to stop sharing here for just a minute and go back to our larger group and see, we have a few minutes before, if we can take a few questions about the recommendations. I would note that in our Thursday program, after our panel conversation, we'll be talking more about the call to action recommendations and what we can do about that moving forward as a department and as a city. Any questions right now, though, about the call to action or project recommendations? I believe, Alita, you have your hand up.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question is, how much of, or how many of some of these excellent ideas, proposals, suggestions would you describe perhaps as low-hanging fruit?
That's a great question. We actually think there's a fair number of them are low-hanging fruit. Even some of the ones that were listed as the top priority. I'll give one example just on the call today. The revising of the historic preservation ordinance is something that we can do internally without having to bring outside folks in to help do that. That, of course, would need to be widely shared and widely discussed among both our current districts and folks who are interested in becoming districts, or even folks who are not even in the preservation world now, which is how to make the ordinance more comprehensive and more varied and more flexible, if you will, to have different options for folks that want that in historic preservation. I'd say that another great example might be the historic preservation kiosks, because we already have a placemaking program here in the Department of City Planning. So we have an apparatus that's already set up to create these little nodes around the City of Atlanta. And so adding that to that program is something we've already done some research on along the way. I think that doing some of the basic survey and inventory work related to highlighting new types of properties in the City of Atlanta is also something we can start to work on pretty quickly along the way. Just a couple of examples.
Thank you.
Let's see. Do we have any other questions for Doug or any of the preservation team? It doesn't look like we do, Doug. So I'm going to conclude our segment for Preservation Week, but I do want to send out a reminder to any of you that are here, and we're welcome you guys to come out for the rest of the week. Tomorrow on Tuesday, we will have Historic Property Virtual Tour, where we will be highlighting the Southview Cemetery, as Doug and I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So we'll have questions and answers there, and we will have an actual video from there. So that should be pretty exciting. Also on Wednesday, we will have what we call hands-on, our technical historic preservation workshop. And Mr. Paul Seamos will be our presenter there on that day, speaking on what makes a building historic. And then lastly, for our conclusion for Preservation Week, we will have our preservation talk, which is a keynote speaker in a roundtable. And the conversation or the last day will specifically talk about racial equity in historic preservation. We'll have Dr. Candy Tate, the keynote speaker, and on our panel, we will have the Reverend Dr. Herman Skip Mason, as well as Dr. Karshik Alvarado and Fred Smith Jr. And then Doug will conclude with some more Future Places Project action, call to action recommendations, and how he'll be addressing that to the panel. So we hope everyone can make it out to those days. As Tim and Kevin and Doug and Leslie and Matt and all of us on our team stresses, equity in historic preservation for us is extremely important. So we think this is the beginning of that. And we'd like to thank all of you for tuning in today to listen to the kickoff session. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.